can demand answers to straight away.
Yes.
Well, like we live in a society, in a world that where you want instant answers, and it just doesn't happen like that, really.
Yes. Yes, I agree. That's a very good point. It is all about instant, gratification in that sense these days. Tell me what it means so I can move on, or whatever. And also, I guess, in a way, the one good point of the story, so to speak, is about the fear, if you will, then how to face that or how to overcome that, or a phobia or what have you. I think that in many cases these might be the biggest things that you can actually learn from in that sense. Would you agree on that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always up for a challenge. I think it's a good thing that we're kind of challenged in these ways.
I also want to ask you a little bit about, if we go back to Sandra Ingerman again, that we were talking about here. She has a bend towards Egypt, and actually ISIS comes up, I see in the book here. That is always fascinating. I mean, it's interesting because so many cases it's always tied back to Egypt in some way or another. What is Sandra's relation to Egypt, and specifically ISIS in this case?
I think Sandra just feels drawn to Egypt in that way, and ISIS was someone that came through to her when she was having a vision quest, if you like, and it was something that she resonates with very much. The kind of archetype of ISIS, who incidentally seems to be more of a guide, not for her in her personal life, but for her in her work and what she does to try and help others, really, in her shamanic work and her healing work. But it is interesting. And again, I don't know personally here. I wonder whether these are like, they are archetypes.
Yes.
And, Egypt and ISIS and what that represents. I don't actually personally feel that there is literally a physical ISIS character.
Right.
In the other world, helping guide people. I don't know. I could be completely wrong about that, but how I kind of interpret it is more of a kind of a symbol of that energy and what ISIS represents.
Yes.
That's the main thing, really, in the energies that ISIS represents.
And what do you think that she represents in this case?
Well, it's obviously feminine energy of some description. I really don't know. I haven't really kind of thought much about it, to be honest.
And when you mention archetype in that sense, do you think that this is solely something that is that exists in the collective subconscious? Is that where you think this kind of energy or this archetype of this feminine energy resides, so to speak?
Yeah, I suppose I do. I mean, there's that kind of like feeling that and saying as well, like, well, nothing exists outside of ourselves. And I kind of like feel that is quite true, really. So the contacts and the beings that we come into contact with that are our allies and guides, are they projected inner contacts, are they projected at outer contacts in that sense that come from within?
Yes.
But then since we're all connected anyway and we're all part of the same energy, if you like, we're all connected by spirit, and so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's a food for thought, isn't it?
Yes. Why don't we do like this? We move on a little bit and focus on another interesting gentleman, and this guy is called Simon Buxton, I think it's pronounced, and it's under the category or title heading "The Path of the Pollen," and he's written a book called "The Shamanic Way of the Bee." This is very interesting. I just have the kind of the brief background story on this guy and some of the things that he's been going into. But for our listeners, tell us a little bit about Simon Buxton and some of the works that he's done.
Okay, Simon Buxton is basically was apprenticed to a bee master and initiated into the path of pollen, which is a very ancient and it was a very secular order that was handed down, like a master-apprentice type teaching. I suppose very similar in a way to Carlos Castaneda in the way that he kind of was apprenticed by Don Juan. And, it's a very, very, very ancient teaching.
I mean, when you mentioned that this is an order, do you know if this has any connections with official branches of other orders, if we talk about Freemasonry or Templars or what have you, or is this a kind of an order that is, by itself, so to speak?
I don't know, and I don't think anyone really knows, because it's like Simon said, is the word cenobific?
Mm-hmm.
Where you've, that's how it survived all these years, was to kind of, only anyone who needs to know knows what they know.
Right.
And so, I mean, really, who knows?
So it's what you're saying is that there is a very a small group of selective people that are initiated into this order and then consequently are carrying the knowledge to the next generation, correct?
Yeah, but then within, I think that there was actually probably not such a small group, but maybe quite even a medium-sized group, but within those groups there are smaller groups still who don't know anything about each other.
Okay. Mm.
If you see what I mean?
Yes.
Mm. And that's certainly the impression I got from talking to Simon about it.
Did you meet Simon?
I haven't even met him yet, and this is weird, right? Because he lived in Bath the same time when I was in Bath, because that's where I come from. And yet we both know people, the same people, but we've never actually met. But we natter for hours on the phone, like. But no, it's bizarre.
How did you hear about him?
I really don't know. It's one of those very random coincidences. I don't know.
Okay.
I think someone might have mentioned him, and then I might have had a look online at his website, which is Sacred Trust. And I think that's probably how I came across him.
Okay, so we have two things to clear up here. Then tell us about what the Sacred Trust Center is, and also let's later dive into what the Path of the Pollen actually is.
Sacred Trust is an organisation that Simon has founded, which is basically sort of shamanic in nature, really, and shares the teachings from the Path of Pollen that he's learned.
And tell us more about the Path of Pollen. What is it? What does it incorporate? And what is the significance of the bee? I mean, if we can talk about the bee as a symbol, what it does to our society, our world, and what is actually happening right now with the bees, because that's a pretty horrific story. Dive into it, Karen.
Yeah, well, there's two things. There's a very old English saying, "Ask the wild bee what the druid knows." And there's another saying, which is, "Tell the bees." So, like Simon was saying, on the one hand you're being told to ask the bees, and on the other hand you're being told to tell them. And it's this kind of like depositing information within the hive, and then people from all the generations of the Path of Pollen who've been putting that knowledge in, and you come along and you can ask the bees, and there's this kind of, like, I suppose, like you say, collective kind of vat of wisdom and information that you can draw upon. So I find that quite fascinating, especially the ask the wild bee what the druid knows. I mean, that's an old English adage. So you think, wow. I mean, it's probably older than the druid movement. That saying, or the modern one. God, it's quite a fascinating thing, really. But the whole thing with the bees. Apparently, and I don't know how true this is. I haven't talked to Simon about it yet. But the organic bees are okay. It's the non-organic bees that are disappearing.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe it's got something to do with either GM crops or the use of chemicals in gardening. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting actually, because the disappearing bees is mentioned in the last 3 episodes of Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who. And their take on it was that the bees had returned to their own planet. I mean, you're thinking, what? So, yeah, I mean, I really don't know. But, I mean, my kind of personal feeling is that the bees is to do with our crops, is to do with that, and the way that we use too many chemicals and the whole GM thing.
Right. Yeah, let's backtrack a little bit more and talk about, and I don't know how much you talked with Simon about this, but you can clarify that for us. Is this the knowledge you're speaking of that is in this, I think they call it the brotherhood and sisterhood of the sacred hive, and do you think that is actually, is it only knowledge restricted to things that has to do with agriculture and consequently all the surrounding issues, so to speak, that dovetails with what the bee signifies, or is this knowledge that expands further beyond that and actually goes into other areas as well? Do you know?
If you want about the path of pollen now?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it does expand. I mean, because it's actually kind of more like a way of living, really. There's a few things. And one of them, which really impressed upon me, is that people in this tradition, they do things, or they talk to do things as a total act, which means they're completely engaged in what they're doing, no matter what it is. We often do things half-assed, don't we? I mean, but if you're living life as if each moment was your last moment, then you would live that moment to the full. And that's what they kind of, that's what they do, really. So everything they do, whether that's a really kind of, something like washing up or whatever it is, if you're doing that with your full attention and your full awareness, then, basically, then you can say at that moment of death, I have no regrets.
And the bee and even the hive, of course, as symbols, that's something that in itself goes back to Egypt again. In that sense, it actually is quite prominent within Freemasonry, of course, the symbolism of the bee and the beehive, the hierarchy of the queen and so forth. So, I mean, the obvious question is if there is a connection. Do you think so? Did you talk with Simon about that?
No, but I know that he knows a Freemasonic handshake and what that is.
That's right.
And I think, how do you know that, Simon? I don't know. I mean, I would have to talk to Simon more about that.
Yes.
Some more information from him. But I do think that anyway, like this whole thing of the, quite often the Freemasons are kind of perceived as being the bad guys or whatever. But I don't view it like that. I view it as that once upon a time, that knowledge was infiltrated and corrupted. Again, you have a kind of society that was formed to protect the wisdom and the knowledge from getting into the wrong hands, that then just gets infiltrated by somebody who's not so kind of well-meaning,
Yes.
And that's what I think happens and has happened.
Yes, well, obviously it's a structure of an undercurrent of society, and I think that, and we